Now I am? Oh man, listen to that. Alright. Well, that's amazing. It's just really cool to be a part of something that has been going on for 41 years. You know, you asked me if you needed this move, and I said no, and I think I do. There. I've been working out. Alright. So this morning we're going to be talking a little bit about freedom. And we were going to be in John chapter 6, but that passage is I think Michael Long could attest to this. You just can't really break it out, and it's like 50 verses long. And so I decided to go a little different direction this morning. So I hope you just be patient with that. I like freedom. Anybody else with me? I'm a 4th of July guy. It's just fun celebrating the 4th of July. It's fun doing the whole thing. It's fireworks are kind of neat, and I love being a part of America, and I love freedom. I love being free. I grew up in a religious situation that hey, thanks, man. You're the best. I grew up in a religious situation where there wasn't a lot of freedom, where we had to think a certain way, we had to do certain things, we weren't allowed to do other things. And it was a very, what we call a fundamentalist upbringing. And there wasn't a lot of freedom, and you don't really recognize it when you're in the middle of it. But when you come out of something like that was oppressive, and that was that did tamp down your soul and keep you under someone's thumb and under a situation like that. When you come out of it, you're blown away by what freedom really is, and you don't really recognize. Sometimes when you've had freedom all the time, you lose sight of what freedom really is. Right? Here's how freedom a lot of times works, or how we see freedom. Or maybe me. Maybe it's me. I won't put you in on my thing, but let's just see. Here's how a lot of people see freedom. I want to be free to think the way I want to think, and this goes every different direction. This isn't just people that believe the opposite of how you might believe or I might believe. This is how all of us tend to be. I want the freedom to think the way I want to think, and then I want to force you to think that way. Right? That's how it works a lot of times. That's our human nature. Our human nature is to finally find something and then to go back and say, well, I think this way now, and you should too, or you're not right with God. Or you don't know what's best for you. Or you aren't a good person. Or you are wrong about politics. Or you are this, or you are that. And we try to bring people and force people into thinking and acting and behaving in the way that we feel like we are in our freedom. Right? And so it's interesting. I love the fact that we live in America, and it seems screwed up sometimes. Doesn't it? I mean, it just does. It seems screwed up sometimes, but it is so much better than the opposite. See, when you think about it, so I've been watching, again, do not say, if you know the score of this, don't hoot, don't holler, don't boo, don't do anything else. If you know the score, don't say anything, because I happen to know there are people in here right now that have taped this game, and I honestly don't want to blow up for them, or anything else. So if you know something, don't say it. But I've been watching the Women's World Cup. Soccer is an amazing sport. And if you don't like it, then I need to force you to. So you're just not right with God if you don't like it. But here's the thing. The women, our women, the U.S. women, they think for themselves. They think for themselves, and they're not afraid to say things make some people mad. And they're not afraid to get out there and be really open about how they feel and how they think and how they, you know what? And somebody came up to me last week and said, what do you think of that? And I was like, well, what do you mean, what do I think of that? Like, what do you think of it? And I said, you know, the truth is, I just like to watch soccer on its face. I like to watch good competitive soccer no matter what. I don't care if it's JV, boys, on JV2 boys on a Tuesday afternoon. If it's competitive soccer, I'm in. I don't like a 10-0 game where it's obvious that one team, but I'm in if it's competitive. And I love the Women's World Cup. I think it was great. I enjoyed every minute of it. But here's the thing. I'm glad we live in a country where it's okay that our women can get out there and say things that we disagree with or agree with, however you may fall on the subject. I'm glad. I'm glad we have that. I'm glad we don't live in a country where they better shut up or else. You know what I mean? That's a good thing. That's a good thing that we have that. That's a good thing that we have people doing things like Colin Kaepernick's doing. It's not a bad thing. You may not agree with it. You may not like it. I may not agree with it. Maybe I'm not saying a word. I'm just saying. I'm free to do that. All right, but what I'm saying is this, that it's good that we live in a place where people can do things that we don't agree with, and they're not beaten down. They're not thrown in jail. They're not kicked out of the country. They're not, because we're free. And freedom means you're able to think for yourself, and we ought to, with everything that we are, guard and protect that ideal of being able to think for ourselves. That's so important. I was sitting, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Not that I make any sense of it, but I've been thinking about it. But when I've been thinking about it, what sparked this in my own head was the conversation that I had in Latvia. Joy and I were in downtown Riga, and we were meeting with the pastor of Matlina Baptist Church. His name's Peter Eisens. How many of you guys know him? Anybody? Peter. So we're sitting there talking to him, and we're talking about everything, just spiritual and all things good. And it was a great conversation. Then I said, "You grew up in the Soviet Union era here in Latvia," and I was like, "What was that like? What was that transition like to independence from that?" And he started telling the story. And I'll never forget it. I promise you I'll never forget it. He starts telling the story, and Peter is kind of a rough and tumble kind of guy. Kind of a man's man kind of guy. And stoic. Kind of that Eastern European, no emotion kind of guy. And he starts telling this story about how he remembered when the uprising started and all the protests began against the Soviet Union, and the cries for freedom were going all throughout the different countries. And in Latvia in particular, they were wanting this freedom. And in the middle of town, years ago, in 1918, they built a freedom monument because they declared independence after World War I. And this freedom monument stands, and it's I think it's an angel. I should have put a picture up and didn't, but it's holding up 3 stars that represent Latvia, and it's just the freedom monument. Well, when the Soviet Union came in, they didn't take it down. They just changed the meaning of it. They said those 3 stars represented the Soviet Union setting them free for freedom. But that wasn't freedom. That wasn't freedom because they weren't able to think for themselves. They had to do exactly what the Soviets said. They weren't able to do any of that. And so when they got there, he said all these protests were happening, and all of a sudden he was younger and young, 19, 20 years old, and this gathering started to happen. Kind of a spontaneous gathering started to happen over toward the Freedom Tower. And he said about 600 students gathered around the tower. Well, the Soviet Union had their police force out there, their military police force guarding it. They wouldn't let anybody near it because they knew what was going on. And Peter said, as he was talking, he said they just kind of started to walk towards it. As a big, he said 600, 700, 800 people gathering, and they just started walking towards us. and the soldiers kept telling them to back up, but then they were overwhelmed, so they had to keep stepping back and stepping back and stepping back, and pretty soon the soldiers just bailed, and they surrounded the Freedom Monument. And he said, and this is what just killed him. This guy just started crying when he was thinking about it. He's like, we just sat there. He said it was dead silent. We couldn't believe we got through. We couldn't believe we were standing there together in unity around that. And he said, I'll never forget this. And tears started streaming out, and he had to stop. And I can't handle that. If somebody else cries, it's like, some of you have the thing where someone throws up, you have to throw up. Anybody have that? Yeah. Some of you is lying right now. You have that, right? You see it, I can hear about someone being sick, and I think, am I sick? I have that with crying. If I see something cry, or somebody cry, or something cry, I don't know. If I see somebody cry, I lose it. So we're sitting in this beautiful hotel in downtown Riga, eating this amazing breakfast that their continental breakfast. We've got to pick it up here in the U.S. I mean, the Latvians know how to do continental breakfast. And we're eating this amazing breakfast, drinking amazing coffee, having a great time, people all around us, and I'm just sitting there bawling. I have no idea why we're crying. He's crying. He has a good reason. I'm crying. And it's just this crazy scene in the middle of it. And he said they're sitting there in silence around this tower. And somebody just yells out, "Freedom!" And it just echoes out. Exactly. Then somebody else, "Freedom!" And they just start screaming out, "Freedom, freedom, freedom." He said, I'll never forget what it was to finally feel free. And just a few months later, Latvia broke free from the Soviet Union as the Soviet Union collapsed and became independent once again. And they just celebrated 100 years of their independence. And he said, it's amazing. Freedom is so amazing. He was blown away by it. Why? Because he had it taken away from him. He knew what it was like to not have freedom. You know what I mean? That makes a big difference when you finally do have freedom. And so, as we think about what is freedom, because I like freedom, I want to see what's the Bible say about it. What's the Bible say about it? In this passage in Galatians, Paul is talking about the fact that somebody at the church of there had been coming in telling them that they needed to get circumcised in order to truly be saved. You needed Jesus and circumcision in order to be saved. That's the context that we're going to pick this up in. And Paul's refuting that. And the truth is, once you break free from something, a lot of times, if we're not careful, we jump right back into something else on a different angle. And we're never truly free. But I want us to be truly free. So it says here, in Galatians chapter 1, in that context, it says, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. That makes tons of sense to me, right? It's for freedom that He set us free. He set us free so we could be and live in freedom. And the cool thing is that even in a place like Latvia that was oppressed by the Soviet Union, even in a place like the Congo where the tribal chiefs are doing so many things to oppress people, even in those areas when the geopolitical situation isn't one of freedom, this freedom can't be stopped. This freedom that Jesus gives cannot be stopped. And I think we'll see that here as we plays out. It says, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. He says, then stand firm and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Don't come out of slavery and then go right back into it. Christ has set you free for freedom. So you can be free. Don't go right back in. And He's saying, basically, you're going to go back in and people are going to say, well, you need to get circumcised.
So Christ has truly set us free.
Yes.
We have to stay free.
That's exactly what it says, right there. All right. So, I thought I was echoing. I thought my voice was set my little fist in there for a second. All right. So, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Once you are set free, don't go back in. And Paul's saying, if you say you have to be circumcised, you're going right back into bondage, because that puts you in a place where you say, okay, well, you love Jesus, but have you done this? And we have to make sure everybody does it. And we have to make sure, and that's sort of the situation I grew up in. Not with that particular subject, but it was with things like, if you're really a Christian, you won't go to the movies. Women, if you're really a Christian, you'll wear skirts down past your knees. If you want to be a really good Christian. If you want to be a Christian, you only read out the King James Bible. And you know what kind of burden that puts on you when you're in the middle of that? You know what kind of slavery and what kind of yoke it puts on you? Here's what it does to you. When I was growing up, I drove by every single church, and when I drove by a church, whether it was full or empty, if it was full, I would say they're compromising because they're not using the King James. If it was empty, I'd say that they're getting exactly what they deserve, because they're not. Look at how their women are dressed. It was weird. It sounds so dumb to say it. But you know what? It was a burden. You were in slavery. You couldn't enjoy the fruits of the Spirit of God working so beautifully throughout the country and throughout the land and throughout all these churches. You couldn't enjoy any of it because they didn't quite think exactly the way you thought, and therefore they weren't quite as good as you, and you had to try to police all of that, and it's just a burden. It's just slavery. It's just being set free by Jesus and saying, okay, I'm set free by Jesus, now I'm going to put these handcuffs on and just sit here in this box. It is for freedom that Christ has said. How many times have I read that? 38. Let's move on. All right. Paul said, mark my words. I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you at all. Isn't that something? Because what becomes the value? The value becomes the righteous works that we do. That becomes the value. How good a Christian I am becomes the value. And we lose sight of Christ in the midst of our Christianity. And we become slaves to religion. Slaves to our flesh. Again, I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is obligated to obey the whole law. If you're doing that, you're putting yourself in the position to say, hey, I'm righteous enough. I can do enough righteous works. I don't need Christ. He's not of a value because I'm able to do this. And Paul's saying, well, if you have to do this, you have to do the whole thing. You're obligating yourself to say, I'm righteous enough to not need Jesus because he's of no value. So you're obligating yourself to have to do the whole law, which we can't do. But the beautiful thing is we don't have to because Christ did, and Christ set us free. So let's live in the freedom of Christ that he's given us. Again, I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised. Yeah, I read that. All right. So you who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. Yikes. Yikes. It is so amazing to be set free by Jesus. It is so great to be able to just be free to be yourself in Christ. I don't have to be anybody else. And if you look close, I'm not trying to be anybody else. I don't think, maybe I am, I don't know. I try not to be. But when I was in this, when I was in my religious thing, I would always try to emulate somebody. I tried to be somebody else. I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't think I measured up. I didn't think I was quite righteous enough because I was in that yoke of bondage. And Jesus, when I realized he set me free, I also realized he created me the way he created me. And it was okay, and to be honest about who I am, it was okay to be me. It was okay to be just who I am because he made me and loves me and set me free. For through the Spirit we eagerly await by faith the righteousness for which we hope. Amen? Amen. I mean, that's what we're doing, right? We're sitting here in the Spirit. We're eagerly await by faith the righteousness for which we hope. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. And I know we're not into this particular subject, but this deserves a huge amen. That in Christ, that it doesn't matter what your religious works are. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter. Your part of it is not what's important. It's Jesus' part of it. We couldn't. He could. We can't. He did. He's the one that we follow. He's the one that did all this for us, and He set us free from the yoke of religion and trying to please an unpleasable God. He's saying, be free from all that. I love you right where you are. That's what the cross says. And He sets us free. Sets us completely free. Now what does that mean? I think we'll get into it here in a minute. I'm going to try to tie this up. You were running a good race. This is funny. You're running a good race until this came in. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? We need to guard this freedom. We need to guard the freedom that Jesus gave us. And not let religion come in. The second any of us, especially Mark, but any of us come in here and start saying, you know what? Jesus is great and we love Jesus, but if you want to really obey God, here's what you need to do. You probably should fire us. You definitely should fire Mark if he says that. Work with me a little bit. See if I come around. You should run to the hills when that starts being said. When we start saying, you know what, God told me that here's what we need to do. No, He didn't. He didn't do that. Unless it was give me money. Maybe. I don't know. But, right? Or we start saying, well, I think God said that you need to, come to me with all your... If we start making it us-centric, get rid of us. That's not freedom. That's bondage. We're all in this together. We're all in the same boat. You were running a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? That kind of persuasion does not come from the one who calls you. A little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. It doesn't take a lot of this legalism to ruin the whole batch. It doesn't take a lot of this bondage to ruin the freedom. A little bit will do it. So let's guard it with everything we are. But what is it, right? That's kind of a nebulous thing now. Well, it's freedom. Well, He clears it up here. I am confident in the Lord that you will take no other view. The one who is throwing you into confusion, whoever that may be, will have to pay the penalty. Brothers and sisters, if I am still preaching circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? So, in other words, they were probably saying, well, Paul teaches this. And Paul's saying, if I was teaching it, why are they persecuting me? I'm not teaching this. Freedom comes at a price, generally. And the thing about us here, and the reason we can argue about it so much, and we don't appreciate it sometimes as much, is because we've never had anything else. And you say what you will, agree or not, but I love the fact that we've had soldiers throughout the years in these different battles actually go to war on foreign soil to protect the freedom that we have. That's huge. That is huge. That's how much it meant to people who were afraid of losing it. It was worth fighting for. And in the church and in this, it's worth fighting for as well. I'm glad we have Spirit. I'm glad Sid is here. And you guys may not know this, but this church could be a lot different right now if it wasn't for Sid saying, no, here's how we need to do it. No, here's how I'd like to do it. And the Holy Spirit leading Sid to take it away from this pastor-centric situation into a situation of plurality of leaders, which is far more biblical, I believe. You You better believe it too. But I'm glad that happened, that we have freedom because of these people in our lives that were willing to sacrifice for something greater than themselves. That's huge. That's what freedom's all about. Brothers and sisters, if I'm still preaching circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been abolished. And we can talk about it later. I gotta keep going here. As for I had you out by 4, I promise. As for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. I'm not going to say what that is, but I think that's great. Paul's awesome. Paul's awesome. So anyway, you can look that up. All right. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be what? Free. You know how awesome it is to be free. The air that you breathe is better. The places you go is better. To be free, to be able to think, to have the freedom to be able to be honest, to have the freedom to say I messed up, and to still be loved. That's what Jesus gives to us. And we should treat each other the way Jesus treats us. We should foster an atmosphere of freedom. How do we do that? Check this out. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. If you do that, you become a slave to your flesh. And he goes on to talk about that. What it looks like to indulge the flesh and what it looks like to have the fruit of the Spirit. The contrasting thing. And you guys can check that out later in Galatians chapter 5. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. You know what the true measure of freedom is in a church? When we've all been set free by the love of Jesus, the true measure of freedom is how we love one another.
Amen.
Not how we make everybody else think like us. It's having somebody come in who thinks different, looks different, smells different. You know, the whole 9 yards is different. And comes in maybe with some kooky ideas. And some of you do, you have some of those. It's just a fact. You know? And I probably do too, but probably not. But anyway, but when you do, it's having somebody that's like that. That's like, you're kind of, that maybe is harder to love. Not any of you. All of you are easy to love. But if somebody were to come in and be it's surrounding them with Christ's love and loving them and setting them free to be able to grow and think and process and walking with them and helping them and admonishing them and growing with them and seeing what they can help you with. We don't know everything. Some of you are closer than others, but we don't know everything. We can learn from everybody, and it's having that attitude. Christ loved us unconditionally. Let's love each other unconditionally. And when we do that, we guard that freedom with everything that we are. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. I love this. I love it. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. You know how we win the culture war? By picketing and telling everybody how much we hate them. And disparaging them on Facebook. Or Twitter. Whichever one you think. That's not how we win the culture war. You know what we do? We're not even concerned with winning the culture war. You know what we do? We have a neighbor that doesn't act the way that a good Christian would act. Or we have a neighbor that has a lifestyle that's just blows our mind. Or they do things we would never do. You know how you show them Jesus? You love them. You love them. You go put your arm around them. You let them know you're there for them. And you love them. That's how we win. This whole story is not about us making everybody think the way we think about Jesus. It's letting everybody see how Jesus actually loves us. That's how we win. That's how we show the gospel. That's how we just spread this beautiful thing that is the freedom of Jesus that He's given us. It's how we love each other. We're not all going to think the same. We don't want to think the same. I've been in those situations. They're incredibly boring. I don't want you to come here and be the choir and just get preached to. I want you to be challenged. I want you to be pushed. I want you to think a little bit. And I want you to do the same for me. But I want to do it in a context of Christ's love. Because that's the only way we can be free to be honest about what we think, to be honest about who we are, to be honest about what we feel, to be honest about what our issues are, to be honest about all of that. You know why Christ set us free? For freedom. You know what we're to do with that freedom? We're to take that love that He showed to us and we're to show it to the world. He loved us unconditionally right where we were. He saved you out of the miry clay. He saved you out of the pit of destruction. And He loved you and me right there. Let's show that same love to those around us. Wherever they're at, whatever they're in the middle of, whatever they're struggling with, whatever they are defiant about, love them. Love them like Jesus. And it'll show them Jesus better than anything else. Let's be free. Amen? Dear Father God, I just ask that you would help us, Lord, as we seek freely your face. Because we want to. Because we love you. And those songs that we sang, they were so appropriate for this. Thank you for that. To hear about your love being so magnificent. That if the ocean were ink and the sky were a scroll, we would run out of both. Trying to explain how amazing this love is and how life-changing this love is. And God, because of that love, you first loved us, God, we love you. And God, we want to be with you. We don't feel compelled by fear. God, we feel encouraged by love. And God, help us as we go out into the world, as we deal with each other. God, help us to do it in an atmosphere of love and therefore freedom. That we can be honest about who we are. We can be honest about our shortcomings. We can be honest about how we feel. We can be honest about those things, God, in a safe environment where we can be loved and cared for and nurtured for, and we can grow and we can draw closer to you, and you can just do amazing things in that context. So God, we ask that you would help us. Free us if we're not. Help us to fight for that freedom where we are already free. And we'll give you the praise. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Would you stand?